This is the third video that I'm going to be doing about Esther. We spent a lot of time together, about 4 years. In that time, she adopted me, and we went to Japan. But she's also taught me a lot of things. And one of the very first things she taught me was about talking. I don't remember how long it was we were hanging out together when she asked me one time, "Nyna, do you think that you're the center of the universe, or that the world revolves around you?" I said, "No, I don't think so." And she said, "I want you to do something for me." And by this time we had really spent a lot of time together, that I could trust her, and I knew that most of the teachings was going to be something real deep. And so she said, "I want you to stop talking for a year. When we are in a group gathering, whether it be a family gathering or ANS or whatever it is, I don't want you to talk. I just want you to listen. I want you to sympathize and have compassion for who's talking. You know, there's a lot of people out there that when they hear a story, they immediately put in, well, what happened to me is, or, you know, something like that." So she told me, she goes, "I just want you to be quiet for a year." I could tell you the first month was hard, but I did it. And I did it because I respected her and I loved her, and I could probably learn something. And I did. After that year, I really, really did learn a lot about people. And when she had me watching these people and what they were saying, and, you know, were they saying it just to be recognized? Were they saying it to get a pat on the back? You know, why were they talking? Why were they saying the things that they were saying? And that was one of the best things. You know, I sometimes... Sorry about that. Sometimes I've tried to tell that story to people who I think could use that advice. Didn't work. You have to really admire the person asking you, or the stories that you hear and you follow. After that time, Esther was starting to get more sick, and I stayed with her a lot. She ended up in the hospital for 30 days. And at that time, I already took the position of an elder keeper in the native way, meaning if you're going to take care of this elder, you do it without pay. You do it 24/7. And I did. I really took that to heart. While we were at the hospital, I don't think it was that one time she was there for a month, but a time before, and I was sitting there just visiting with her, and she started giggling, and she looks at me and she said, "Why don't you start crocheting?" And I said, "I don't know how to crochet." She said, "Idle hands get you in trouble. Maybe you should learn to crochet." I said, "Okay." So I did, and it was cool. That time that I spent with her for a month in the hospital, she had regular visitors. Norman and Willard came quite often. They knew that I stayed with her 24/7. At first I had to sleep on the floor, But then the hospital realized what I was doing and they got me a chair to sleep on. The only time I left her was when I had to go home and shower. And even then I felt bad about leaving her alone, so I'd race back to the hospital. I remember reading an article about, I don't even remember where it was now, but Richard Jackson had said something about my mom taught me that words are like rocks. And, to know how, you need to know how to use them and be careful how you use them. And I remember Esther saying that to me. She goes, you have to watch what you say. If you're talking to somebody, you don't want to hurt them because it could last them a lifetime just by the words you say. Okay, that was pretty cool. Esther was just full of traditional stories as well as today's stories and today's lessons. I'm going to jump ahead on this one. This story this was after we went to Japan, and I'll be telling those stories later, but she said, Nyna, have you ever been hurt? I said, yeah. She said, no, have you ever been hurt down there? I said, yeah. She said, I want you to tell me about it. Just write them down and when. I said, okay. And after I went home, I wrote them down, and when I was 32, some guy attempted to rape me at my sister's house. It was early in the morning, and I got up and I ran away, and I was walking home. This was in Ketchikan, and I'm walking and I'm complaining and kind of yelling at God, saying, why'd this happen to me? I said it a couple times when I said, I can't believe this happened again. And I said, what, again? This has happened to me before? So when Esther asked me to go home and write it, I started to write down all of them. And I brought them back to her the next day, and I gave it to her, and she said, no, this is not what I want. She said, I want you to go home and write it. I want you to go and write who he was, where you were, what you smelt, what you were wearing, what he was wearing, what the weather was like, what he said, what you said. I want you to write it all down. She said, this is going to take you a while. I don't want you to come back until you're done. It might take you a month. It might take you 2 months or longer. But I want you to go home and write it. I said, okay, I will. When I was 32 and I remembered I didn't remember all at once. I remember I got home. I was so angry. First of all, I took a bath for a couple hours. And that day I went up to, the guy didn't rape me at that time. I just felt dirty. And I went up to Wish and I got a book about rape. And I left it on the chair. I meant to put it away before Hugh got home. And Hugh seen it and he said, "What is this? Were you raped?" I said, I wasn't raped, but I was attempted. Somebody attempted to rape me. That Sunday, I remembered the first person that molested me. I'm going to tell you right now, don't ever let any man, son, brother, uncle, friend, roughhouse with your children in front of you. Or in a car or anywhere. You never know. But I was 5 years old and we got into this green Suburban up by the Hill Bar in Craig, and there was 6 adults and me. 3 got in the front and I got in the back with the other 3, and I sat on one of my uncle's laps. I had on a dress. And he had slid his fingers into me. And I remember holding on to the back of the seat. And I was looking around at everybody. And then I looked down at my hands, and my hands were just super white from hanging on so tight. And then I looked around again, and I thought, doesn't anybody realize that the world just ended? I was just 5. And I woke up that Sunday and I told my husband about it. And he just held me. And he said, "Nyna, this is not your fault. This is not your fault." All week I cried over that. And then the next Sunday, I remembered the second one. I was 11. And I was at my auntie's house. I always babysat for her. Even at that age, you know, you just know if they're going to be gone for a little while, you can leave them at that age. And anyway, one of my cousins walked in. And he walked around the house looking around, and he said, "Is anybody here?" And I said, "No." And his body changed, and he walked up to the front door. I thought he was leaving, and here he locked it. And he came over to me, and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I want to show you something in the bedroom." And he grabbed my arm and he pulled me in there, and I said, "What?" He threw me down. he threw me down. He was a couple years older than I was, and I tried everything to stop him. I wrote down for Esther all the details of being on the bottom bunk and clothes all over, and how he held me down with my hands above my head with just one hand. I remember trying to bite him, telling him to stop. I remember he got up and he left, and it took me a long time to move. And I pulled my pants up, my underwear and my pants, and it hurt. And I walked over to the front door and locked it. I ran back in the kitchen and I checked the back door. And I locked it. And I went into the bathroom, and I remember sitting there on the toilet, and the gross smell. I smelled horrible down there. And I tried to wipe. And it hurt. I just sat in there and cried. I don't know how long I was in there. And I remember looking at the walls, and this... We didn't have the plastered walls that we have today, but we had the wooden slats. And I remember looking at how worn they were, wondering how long the house had been there for them to be that worn. Anyway, I finally was able to wipe enough. I couldn't really handle my underwear and my pants being on, but I had to have them on, and I got done crying. And I went in the living room, and there was a knock on the door. It kind of scared me. I didn't want to answer. There was no window on the door. And then I heard my uncle, not the one that lived at the house, but from somewhere else, and he knocked on the door, and I opened it. And he came in, and he looked at me, and he said, "Is anybody here?" And I said, "No, just me and the kids." I know. At least I thought he could smell what had happened. And he looked at me and he said, "Are you okay?" And I didn't answer him. And he knelt down by me and I kind of moved away and he said, "Nyna, whatever happened to you, don't tell your mom." I didn't know why. And I never did. The next Sunday, after I remembered all that, I told Hugh about it. This was the second Sunday after I got that book from Wish, and again he held me and he let me cry, and he said, "It's not your fault, it's not your fault." And for days I would cry. I mean, a lot harder than the first time, but holy cow, it was tough. And the next Sunday I remembered this third one. I'm not going to go into every one of them, but Sunday after Sunday after Sunday I remembered another rape or sexual assault. Esther was right. It took me 3 months to write down every single one and all the details. I remember typing them out, and it would take me all day to write one paragraph, or I would write one sentence and it would last all day. I'd cry and cry and cry and cry and cry. I mean, it took me 3 months to do that, and in that time, I remember Hugh coming home one time and he said, "Nyna, I want you to take a shower. And if you don't take a shower today, by the time I come home, I'm going to drag you in there and you're going to take a shower." And I said, "What the heck's wrong with you? Why are you getting so mad about a stupid shower?" He said, "Nyna, you've been sitting here for 3 days. You're not eating. You're not doing anything. The curtains are closed. Everything. It's like you're in a cave." I said, "Okay, I'll take a shower." But through all that time, he stood by me and helped me and reminded me that everything that happened to me wasn't my fault. I remember one friend, she told me, "I don't want to be your friend no more because all you talk about is people who hurt you and meaning rape me." And she goes, if I'm going to be your friend, I want to talk about other things." I remember when I was remembering all this, after when I turned 32, and I was remembering all of them every Sunday after they finally quit, after they stopped. My husband was hurt at the time and he had a really bad back. He needed back surgery. I remember screaming at him one time, "Why do you love me? Why do you stay with me? Why? I said, "How could you love somebody that's been through all this crap?" I never did wait for his answer. I stormed out of the house. I ended up moving to Craig, then to Heidelberg, and I hated men. You never know why people do what they do. I know why I did what I did. After I remembered all those stupid rapes, I turned to my girlfriends. Anyway, I wrote down all those stories, every one of them for Esther. And I brought them up to her. And her and I and Yuka were at the house, and I said, I finished all those stories you wanted. And she said, read one to me. I read one. I had also written little short stories and poems that I had. The one I read her was the one when I was almost 15. I wasn't quite 15, I was 14. My mom and dad had this stroller. They loved to go out on it. Anywhere from 2, 3, up to 7 days at a time. I don't know where my sister Rose was at this time. And my best friend was Ronnie McIsayat. When Mom told me that they were leaving me with an uncle, oh, I was so mad. I said, I don't want to stay here with him. She said, I want you here with him. And on and on and on. And I told, remember those phones we had back then? You'd pick up the phone and there'd be a whole bunch of people on the party line. It was your phone call if there was so many rings and stuff like that. Anyway, I called Ronnie Mac and I told him he needed to come over. And we were visiting, and my uncle told him he had to leave. I had worked it out with Ronnie that when he left, to come around the back of the house, and I'd let him in the window. And so that's what we did. As soon as my uncle made him leave, I went in the room. I opened the window and Ronnie climbed in. And I had this really, really tall shelf that my dad had built. It was pretty heavy. And Ronnie and I pushed that in front of the door. And sure enough, about 45 minutes later, my uncle tried to walk in. And of course he couldn't open the door, and he was, Nyna, I need to check on you. I said, I'm fine. I'm going to go to sleep. He said, open the door. I want to make sure you're okay. I said, I'm fine. Just leave me alone. So Ronnie stayed that whole night, and You know, what was awesome is he never pushed me or tried anything with me. He was a friend at that time. About 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:30, he got up and he snuck out the window and he took off and went to work. Early that morning, I got up and I took off and went to school. That next afternoon, or the next evening, Ronnie told me that he couldn't stay, and so we didn't know what to do, and so I called, or Ronnie called Dennis Edenshaw, that was his best friend. So Dennis did the same thing Ronnie did, and he climbed in the window and he stayed the night. And the next morning, he took off. My uncle figured out what was going on. He seen Dennis walking down the street. He grabbed me and he brought me in the living room and did whatever he did. I had all the details written out and I read it to Esther. And we were, all three of us were crying really hard. There was Yuko, me and Esther there. And after we were done crying, Esther said, "Do you know what we just did?" I said, "No." And she said, she took my hand and she held my hand and she pinched my skin and she was going like that. Kept pinching my skin and pulling it a little bit. She said, every little thought, every feeling, every emotion, your body remembers it. She said, you just took it and you pulled out every emotion. She kept doing that to my arm. You pulled out everything out of your body. She said, don't put that